Welcome back to the deep dive.
Hey there.
You know, every now and then we sit down at the table, look at the stack of sources in front of us, and just realize we're not just looking at a single story.
Right. Not even close.
We are looking at an entire ecos thought, and today is absolutely one of them.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to welcome you, our listener, to a journey that starts with a single massive Hollywood movie deal, but which very quickly spirals into a fascinating and frankly dizzying exploration of modern culture wars.
And Hollywood economics.
Yes, and Hollywood economics. And believe it or not, theology.
It really is a massive escalation. I mean, we're essentially mapping out a cultural battlefield today.
Exactly.
We're looking at how a seemingly straightforward piece of entertainment news is interpreted as a major ideological event. It goes from a casting announcement to literal spiritual warfare in about 3 steps.
It's wild. And to do that, we need to be very clear about what we're actually looking at today.
The source.
Right, the source. So for this deep dive, our sources include an article from a pop culture site called Fandom.
Written by John F. Trent.
Correct. We also have a transcript from a related YouTube channel, which is called the Trent Report. We have some specific commentary from a TikTok creator named Lori A. Waters.
Right.
And we'll be dipping into the community comments section of that Fandom Pulse site just to get a read on the audience's reaction.
Now, before we really dive into the deep end here, it's a quick heads up for you listening.
Yeah, please.
The sources we're unpacking today deal with really heavy, highly charged political, social, and religious themes.
Extremely charged.
Right. Specifically, they're written and spoken from a very distinct conservative Christian perspective.
Yes.
And they are heavily critiquing what the authors describe as woke Hollywood and gender ideology.
Yes. And I want to be crystal clear about our role here today.
Very important.
Our job today is not to take a side.
No.
We aren't here to validate these views. We aren't here to condemn these. We are not endorsing the commentary, and we certainly aren't here to mock it. We are literally just holding up a mirror to this ecosystem.
We're putting on our anthropologist hats, basically.
That's exactly it. We want to figure out what they're arguing, unpack the underlying logic they are using, and map out why this specific cultural debate is gaining so much traction right now.
Precisely. It's about understanding the framework of the arguments,
Right.
regardless of where anyone, including ourselves or you listening, might fall on the political or cultural spectrum.
Right.
Because the mechanics of this debate are incredibly complex once you get past the surface.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's.
We need to start with the inciting incident, the match that basically lit the powder keg.
The movie deal.
The movie deal. According to the news dropped in our sources, Legendary Entertainment, the studio behind massive blockbusters like Dune and those Godzilla vs. Kong movies.
Big studio.
Very big. They have signed a 7-figure movie deal for a project called Alchemised. And this project is based on a work of fan fiction by an author named SenLinYu.
And here's where the sources immediately flag something.
Yeah.
They specifically note right up front in all their coverage that SenLinYu is a gender ideology activist who uses they/them pronouns.
That biographical detail is framed as highly relevant by the authors of our...
It's basically the foundational brick of their entire...
But before we get to that ideological reaction, we actually have to look at the genesis of this intellectual prop.
Because the journey of Alchemised, from an internet forum to a 7-figure studio deal, is just a fascinating study in modern publishing.
It really is. And honestly, if you aren't deep into internet fan culture, the origins here might blow your mind a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
The sources trace Alchemised back to a wildly popular Harry Potter fandom.
Harry Potter.
Yes. And the original title of this fanfiction was Manacled.
Manacled. Now, for the uninitiated, Manacled was what the fanfiction community calls an alternate universe story, or an AU.
An AU, right. And this isn't just a slight tweak to the timeline.
No. Yeah.
An alternate universe story takes the established character and drops them into a fundamentally different reality.
And the premise of Manacled is incredibly dark.
So dark. It imagines a world where the villain, Voldemort, actually wins the Wizarding War at the end of the Harry Potter.
The good guys.
The good guys lose, the school falls, the bad guys take over the entire world.
And the specific narrative focus of Manacled, according to the breakdown we read in the Fandom Pulsar, it centers on the characters Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy.
Right.
In this alternate universe where the villains have triumphed, Hermione Granger is captured and forced to become a surrogate for Draco Malfoy.
Hold on, let me just pause right there.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about taking a young adult fantasy series, a series that literally defined the childhoods of millions with themes of friendship and magic and growing up,
Right.
and injecting it with deeply mature, grim, frankly terrifying.
It's a massive departure.
It is an incredibly jarring departure from the tone of the mainstream Harry Potter books that most people out there.
It is a complete subversion of the original tone. But here is where the business side actually comes in.
The legal stuff.
Right. Legendary Entertainment cannot legally make a Harry Potter movie.
Yep.
Those rights are locked down tight by Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling. So this story had to go through a highly transformative process.
Our sources note that the fan fiction was taken out of print online.
Taken down completely.
And then extensively reworked to become this new, legally distinct property called Alchemised.
What's fascinating here is the industry practice that is often colloquially called filing off the serial.
Filing off the serial numbers. I've seen this happen a few times in publishing.
Super common in publishing now.
But it is wild to see it happen at the seven-figure Hollywood studio level.
Well, it's becoming increasingly common there, too. Filing off the serial numbers is where an author takes an established, wildly popular piece of fanfiction, and they strip out all the copyrights, all the specific trademark location, the established lore of the original creator.
All the Harry Potter stuff?
Gone. Then they replace them with original creation.
So instead of Hogwarts, you have a generic magical academy.
Exactly. Or instead of a specific spell name, you have a generic incantation.
You know, the most famous historical precedent for this is 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, totally.
Which famously started as a Twilight fan.
Right.
The author filed off the serial numbers. Edward Cullen became Christian Grey. Bella Swan became Anastasia Steele. The vampires became billionaires.
And it became a global publishing and box office phenomenon.
Massive.
Because it allows a story that is already proven to have a massive built-in audience online to be sold as original intellectual property without getting sued into oblivion.
Okay, so Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy are gone.
Gone.
In their place, in the scrubbed, legally clear IP of Alchemized, we have two new characters, Helena Marino and Kane Ferrum.
Let's look at the world they built for them, because it is bleak.
It's so bleak. According to the breakdown in the Fandom Pulse article, the story is now set in the world of Palladia. Helena Marino is described as a once gifted alchemist and healer. She fought as part of a resistance.
Right.
But in the months leading up to her capture by the ruling class, she suffered severe memory.
And the Trent Report transcript adds a crucial little detail to that. It suggests she may have actually inflicted this memory loss upon herself to protect resistance secrets.
Which is a genuinely great dramatic hook.
It is.
So, the world of Palladia is ruled by a new class of corrupt guild families and, interestingly, depraved necromancers.
Necromancers, that's a big shift.
Huge. This ruling class looks at Helena, and despite resistance records claiming she was insignificant, they believe she might be the key to some final gambit of the resistance.
So what do?
Right.
They send her to the estate of the High Reed, a man named Kane Ferrum.
And this is where the story gets into the mechanics of that dark premise we mentioned earlier.
Right. At the estate, she is subjected to a torturous process called transference. Kane Ferrum essentially invades her mind. Using this magical or alchemical process, he tries to forcibly unlock those hidden memories.
It's heavy. The deal for this original IP was officially reported by Boris Kitt over at The Hollywood Reporter.
Which is as mainstream industry news as it gets.
It is. And the Fandom Pulse article includes a quote from the author, SenLinYu, reacting to the news.
What'd they say?
They told The Hollywood Reporter, "I'm honored by Legendary's incredible enthusiasm project and can't wait to see the world of Palladia to life."
It really highlights a structural shift in how stories are being sourced today.
How so?
Well, you have the wholesome, universally recognized mainstream image of Harry Potter.
Right.
And then you have this massive, highly engaged fan community that completely subverts that source material. They take it into a realm involving necromancy, psychological invasion, forced surrogacy, and memory wipe. And now, that subverted, deeply dark material isn't just staying on internet forum. It's jumping right back into the mainstream with a massive studio investment.
Right. It shows how fan communities are essentially functioning as outsourced research and development for Hollywood.
Exactly, R&D.
They test what audiences want, even the really dark stuff, and the studios just swoop in to buy the winners.
And that dynamic raises an interesting point of analysis regarding Hollywood's current strategy. And it's something the sources immediately latch onto.
The fan
Why turn to fan fiction at all? This brings us to a comment highlighted from the Fandom Pulse community section.
Matt from the past.
Right. A user named Matt from the past asks a very pointed question about this exact phenomena. He asks what it says about how desperate Hollywood is for ideas that they are paying 7 figures for fan fiction rights.
Right. He literally asks, where have all the writers gone?
Yeah.
He argues that Hollywood's reliance on fanfic shows a complete desperation for original ideas. He even compares the current landscape to classic cinema.
He specifically mentions the iconic movie Network.
Right. He says we will never get a movie like Network again because, in his view, there are no writers and no ideas left in Hollywood. They're just repackaging internet.
It's a profound skepticism about the creative health of of the entertainment industry.
Def.
The implication from that, and echoed by the broader community in these sources, is that a healthy industry generates its own original, groundbreaking ideas.
Right.
A declining industry, on the other hand, has to mine the internet for reworked derivative material, no matter how dark or subversive it might be.
They view fan fiction not as the new punk rock of literature, but as a symptom of corporate creative bankruptcy.
Exactly. But if Matt is worried about the quality and originality of the writing, the next voice we looked at in these sources is worried about something much, much heavier.
Right. Because when you take niche, dark internet subculture material and blast it onto a major mainstream platform, you trigger an intense reaction.
Very intense.
And that reaction isn't always just about whether the script is good or bad.
No, it often shifts immediately into the moral and spiritual realm.
Which is exactly what happens here.
The sources move from reporting on the Hollywood deal to examining the actual moral implications of the content itself.
To do this, the Fandom Pulse article heavily features commentary from a TikTok creator named Lori A. Waters.
Right, and she approaches this entirely from a strict, conservative Christian perspective.
Lori A. Waters is incredibly direct in her video. Her main thesis isn't a film critique.
Not at all.
It's a warning. She states unequivocally that Christians should strictly avoid alcohol.
And she provides a very explicit list of content warnings to back up her argument.
According to Trent's article covering her video, states that the book romanticizes dark, and she lists themes including rape, torture, human experimentation, cannibalism, and necrophilia.
Those are extreme themes by any standard.
Absolutely.
Let alone for something that originated adjacent to a young adult property.
Yeah, that's the wild part.
But what makes Waters' commentary significant for our analysis today is not just the list of trigger warning, it is the theological argument she builds around them.
Right. She frames the consumption of this media not as a passive act of energy. She sees it as an active, high-stakes spiritual danger.
She argues that consuming this kind of content regularly desensitizes your spirit.
Yes. She uses a very specific phrase that really stood out. She says it will sear your conscience. She claims that by engaging with this material, a person becomes less sensitive to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, and they might stop feeling any conviction about reading or watching dark.
The phrase searing the conscience is a really powerful theological concept.
Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Historically, in Christian theology, the conscience is viewed as the internal moral compass guided by God.
Right.
To sear it like cauterizing a wound with a hot iron implies a permanent or semi-permanent dulling of that moral compass.
It creates scar tissue over your morality.
Exactly. She's suggesting that exposure to dark fiction doesn't just entertain you for a few hours. It fundamentally alters how you perceive right and wrong on a spiritual level.
She contrasts this by talking about spiritual nourishment.
Right, the food analogy.
She asks her audience, are you feeding the flesh or the spirit? She argues that engaging with a world like Palladia is giving the spirit fleshly food, which ultimately dulls or stifles.
And she goes on to say that after a while, this kind of media corrupts the imagination.
Yeah.
It starts to distort a person's perception of people, of love, and even of God's character. You literally start seeing the world through the lens of Palladia rather than reality.
And she grounds this argument in specific biblical text.
Philippians.
Right. She cites Philippians chapter 4, verse 8.
For those unfamiliar, that's a very famous verse instructing believers to meditate on things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and praiseworthy.
And her conclusion is that Alchemised with its necromancy and torture is none of these things.
Not pure or lovely.
Exact. But perhaps her most damning critique from both a literary and a spiritual perspective is her claim that there is absolutely no redemption or hope.
And John F. Trent, the author of the Fandom Pulse article, completely echoes this theological stance.
He does. He brings in his own historical religious reference, cites St. Basil's instructions to flee from wicked.
Trent frames the act of engaging with this kind of media, whether you're reading it, watching it, or playing it, as literally risking one's immortal soul.
Risking your soul. He urges his audience to run as far away as possible and to fear God instead of man.
It is incredibly stark language for an article about a movie deal.
It really is.
This raises an important question when we look at how audiences interact with narratives.
What's that?
If a story truly lacks redemption or hope, as Waters claims Alchemised does, how does that conflict with the traditional narrative structures that audiences, particularly religious audiences, expect?
That is a great point because classic storytelling, especially in the Western tradition, almost always relies on a moral arc. You have a journey through darkness, sure, but it ultimately leads to the light, or at least to a profound lesson learned.
Exactly. Even tragedies usually have a restorative element at the end, a sense of catharsis or moral clarity.
The villain gets punished. The hero learns a lesson.
Right. If these sources are accurate in their reading of the text, that it was merely darkness for the sake of dark, the absence of that redemption is what makes the work spiritually dangerous to them.
It's a journey into the abyss without a rope to pull you back out.
It's the metaphor of fleshly food versus spiritual food that really clarifies how these commentators view the media diet of the average.
Yeah, they are not looking at a movie ticket as a simple transactional exchange for 2 hours.
Not at all.
They view every book, every movie, every streaming series as an intake of either spiritual nourishment or spiritual poison.
It's a lens of continuous, uninterrupted spiritual warfare.
Spiritual warfare.
The media landscape isn't a marketplace of ideas. It is an active battlefield for soul. And this isn't an entirely new phenomenon. If you look back at historical moral panics, like the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, or the massive crusades against Dungeons and Dragons, or heavy metal music.
Oh, yeah, totally.
You see the exact same theological framework. The belief that engaging with fictional darkness acts as a literal, metaphysical gateway to real-world corruption.
But the sources we are looking at today don't stop at the moral critique, and this is the pivot that I found truly fascinating.
They go further.
They don't just see this dark content as an accident. They don't look at it and say, oh, a studio is just catering to a weird, dark, niche internet community that happened to get popular.
No, they see it as highly intentional.
Right. And here is where it gets really interesting. According to the sources, this isn't just a matter of bad taste or even just bad morals.
They argue it is part of a deliberate, coordinated, and incredibly cynical economic and cultural strategy by Hollywood.
Yes, and to understand that, we have to look at how they view the money.
This is where John F. Trent's central thesis in the YouTube transcript really comes to the forefront.
The wealth transfer idea.
Right. He makes the bold, overarching claim that Hollywood is intentionally rewarding what he calls woke activists rather than seeking traditional profit.
He looks at the reported 7-figure deal for Alchemised, notes the author's background as a gender ideology activist, and concludes that this isn't about making a blockbuster.
This is about funding an ideology.
So to explain how this supposedly works, the Trent Report brings in a theory proposed by a novelist named Isaac Young.
Isaac Young.
Young laid out this theory back in January 2025 during a massive online discussion about the Disney Star Wars The Acolyte.
We need to walk through this theory step by step.
Yeah.
Because it completely flips the script on how we usually think businesses operate.
It really does. Let's contextualize the numbers they use to anchor this theory, because they are staggering.
Huge numbers.
Isaac Young points out that Disney spent around $200 million producing The Acolyte.
Now, for anyone who didn't follow that saga, The Acolyte was a major Star Wars television show that was incredibly divisive online.
And it was ultimately canceled after 1 season.
Right. So in a standard capitalist model, a studio spends $200 million with the goal of making a massive return on investment.
They want to appeal to the widest possible audience, sell merchandise, drive Disney Plus subscriptions, make a profit.
Exactly. But Young claims that making a return on investment was never the primary goal for the executives in charge.
Never the goal.
No. He claims that the $200 million was, in his words, a massive wealth transfer to their clients. The clients, in his framework, being the ideological activists working on the show. The writers, the consultants, the specific actors, the directors.
So he argues that Disney intentionally funneled that money to put it directly into the pockets of their ideological allies.
Yes, while purposely inciting mainstream outrage to generate cultural friction.
Hold on, let me get my head around this, because this is the part that just breaks my brain a little bit.
It's a leap.
They are suggesting that a massive publicly traded company like Disney, with a board of directors and furious shareholders, intentionally sets hundreds of millions of dollars on fire just to pay their friends and annoy the public.
That's the claim.
How does Young even begin to justify that mechanically? Wouldn't the shareholders, wouldn't people get fired immediately?
That is the logical counterargument, yes. But Young introduces the concept of intentional failure to explain.
Intentional failure.
He argues that for this specific insulated class of Hollywood executive, making a profit is now just a happy accident.
A happy accident, wow.
It is no longer the primary directive. He accuses executives of strip mining intellectual properties and franchises.
Franchises like Star Wars that have been universally beloved for decades.
Exactly. He says they are strip mining them to fund their own ideological vanity projects.
So they view the franchise not as a golden goose to be nurtured, but as a battery to be drained until it's dead, just using its stored energy to power their specific cultural agenda.
That is a perfect way to put it. And regarding your question about executives getting fired or the company collapsing, Isaac Young has an answer for that too.
What's the answer?
It's what he sees as the executive endgame.
The end.
He argues that these executives do not plan on carefully shepherding these institutions into the future. They aren't thinking 50 years down the line.
So what are they about?
He believes that when the institutions inevitably collapse under the weight of these continuous financial failures, the executives themselves will be completely insulated by their immense personal wealth.
Ah, so they get out before the ship sinks.
Right. He specifically points to Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy to illustrate this endgame.
Okay.
He notes that her estimated net worth is around $300 million.
300.
And he asks rhetorically, is she going to worry about the collapse of Lucas? Is she going to worry about inflation or paying for a house or buying a car?
Obviously not.
His answer is an emphatic no. She will be largely fine, perhaps even halfway to being a billionaire, regardless what happens to the company, the IP, or the broader economy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at a highly cynical, almost feudal interpretation of modern Hollywood economics.
Very feudal. Lords and peasants.
The sources are completely rejecting the standard capitalist model that we are all taught. They genuinely don't believe studios are making products to sell to the masses for a profit anymore.
Not at all.
Instead, they propose a system where studios act more like royal treasuries, distributing hoarded wealth to loyal ideological allies, regardless of the financial loss on the corporate balance sheet.
It is a wild paradigm shift. Think about the implications of this.
Yeah.
If audiences like the commentators we are reading in the Fandom Pulse community genuinely believe that studios actively want to fail financially just to fund activists, it completely changes how they interact with media news.
Absolutely. When a project like The Acolyte or potentially Alchemized flops with general audiences, a normal observer might think, oh, the studio made a mistake. The marketing was bad or the script was weak.
Right.
But through the lens of this wealth transfer, every box office flop is actually viewed as a successful, calculated ideological transfer of funds.
The failure's the feature, not the bug.
The activists got paid, the traditional fans got angry, the mission was accomplished.
And that leads to the ultimate question in this ecosystem. If the primary goal isn't profit and the financial failure is acceptable to them, what is the actual on-the-ground purpose of pushing this specific, often highly controversial content onto the mainstream public?
Right. Why spend $200 million or seven figures for a fan fiction to make this stuff visible?
The sources argue that the answer is cultural warfare, pure and simple.
Which brings us to the sociological aspect of Trent's argument.
Yes.
John F. Trent takes the economic theory we just discussed and layers a deeply sociological claim right on top of it.
A very heavy claim.
He states that funding these projects is ultimately about pushing propaganda and engaging in what he calls humiliation rituals.
Humiliation rituals. The term humiliation ritual in this context is a very heavy-loaded phrase.
Extremely.
It's meant to describe a deliberate tactic designed to break down traditional societal norms.
How does that actually work, according to his theory? I mean, mechanically.
Trent's argument is that forcing mainstream audiences to witness, or at least be culturally surrounded by, content they find morally repugnant.
Like the dark necrophilia adjacent of
Exactly, or what he views as gender ideology. He says it is a calculated way to normalize the abnormal.
Okay.
It's a way of asserting dominance. By making this the mainstream culture, it's designed to desensitize the public, erode traditional values, and essentially force the audience to accept things that violate their conscience.
He frames it not just as a disagreement over storytelling tropes or casting, but as a direct, intentional attack on what he calls natural law and divine law.
It is a very stark, zero-sum view of culture. There's no middle ground.
None at all. And you can see exactly how deeply this view resonates with the community when you look at the comment section on Fandom Pulse.
The polarization there is intense, and it's highly reactionary. Let's look at the comment from a user named TJ.
TJ, yeah.
TJ states that every time they read about the contents of what they broadly categorized as female-written sci-fi fantasy,
they feel completely justified in their blanket refusal to read any female author whose first book was published after.
Any female author post-2010. That's a huge generalization.
TJ goes on to say that while there might be an occasional good book in that demographic, the likelihood of it being bad or woke is so high they won't even take a chance anymore.
Right.
They explicitly characterize these post-2010 works as lame and gay, using that phrase as a derogatory catch-all.
It is a stunning example of how a single piece of news, A movie deal for one specific author with they-them pronoun acts as absolute, undeniable confirmation bias.
It feeds right into pre-existing sweeping grievances against an entire demographic of writers.
It justifies a complete boycott.
It shows how localized news is instantly weaponized in a broader cultural conflict. And the sidebars of the Fandom Pulse website, our sources also highlight, they paint a very clear picture of this broad...
Fandom Pulse really functions as a hub for this exact type of cultural framing.
Right. The articles promoted in the Fandom Pulse ecosystem show a highly consistent theme.
For example, there is an article citing a former Amazon and Disney executive named Roy Price. The headline claims Price affirms that Hollywood has contempt for the audience and a hostility toward white people and men.
There is also a mention of a recent controversy involving a science fiction novel called Orbital by Samantha Harvey.
That was a huge flash.
The article notes that the book's Goodreads page was suspended after being review bombed by angry...
And allegedly, this review bombing happened simply because the book featured a Russian character.
It highlights how hypersensitive, reactive, and geopolitically charged the cultural atmosphere has become around publishing.
And crucially, the sources we're examining don't just complain about the state of affairs, they actively promote alternatives.
Alternatives, right.
There's a strong, concerted push for what they call based or right-wing and Christian science fiction.
Wait, I see the term based thrown around a lot in these forums and comment sections. For anyone not deep in internet culture, what exactly does that signify?
Good question. In this specific internet parlance, based is essentially the opposite of woke.
Okay.
It originally meant being yourself and not caring what others think. But in these political and cultural circles, it has evolved. It now means content that boldly reinforces traditional, conservative, or anti-progressive values.
So a base sci-fi novel is one that explicitly rejects modern identity politics or progressive messaging.
Exactly. So the site prominently advertises a based book called The Immortal Ed by an author named John Del Arroz.
They frame this book, and others like it, as a necessary alternative to the mainstream publishing world that they believe has been completely corrupt.
This promotion of alternative media is a key piece of the puzzle here. It highlights a concerted attempt to build a completely parallel entertainment economy.
A parallel economy.
Think about the logic. If you genuinely believe mainstream Hollywood hates you,
right?
If you believe it is trying to spiritually humiliate you through humiliation rituals and is using its immense wealth merely to transfer funds to activist clients while purposefully destroying beloved franchise.
The logical next step isn't just to write angry comments on a blog.
No, the logical next step is to completely secede from that culture and build your own infrastructure.
You buy your own books, fund your own movies, and create your own ecosystem.
Precisely. That is exactly what Fandom Pulse and his community are attempting to foster, a parallel economy for audiences who feel alienated by the mainstream.
It represents a complete fracturing of the monoculture.
It really does.
We are no longer watching the same movies and debating whether the plot was good or the acting was believable. We are looking at the exact same movie announcements, the exact same casting news, and debating whether they are instruments of spiritual warfare and deliberate economic sabotage.
It's a completely different conversation.
So let's bring you, our listener, back to the surface after that deep dive. Take a breath. Think about that interesting journey mapped out.
It's a lot to take in.
We started with a fan-written alternate universe on an internet forum where Voldemort wins the Wizarding War.
Right.
We watched that dark fanfiction file off its serial numbers, changing Hermione and Draco into original characters to transform into a 7-figure original IP called Alchemised.
Complete with necromancers, memory wiping, and psychological torture.
And then we unpacked how the simple industry announcement of that deal triggered an absolute avalanche of conservative...
We saw how these sources used this single Hollywood deal as a microcosm to discuss massive, sweeping theories of the world.
They moved from a TikToker's severe warning about spiritual desensitization and searing the conscience
to a novelist's complex theory about deliberate corporate failure and wealth transfers to ideological activists.
And they took it all the way to sociological claims of humiliation, rituals designed to attack natural law itself.
Our goal today was to map this fascinating cultural battlefield neutrally, to show you the exact architecture of these arguments and how they connect.
So what does this all mean for you? Why should you care about any of this?
Even if you never read a single page of Alchemised.
Even if you never buy a ticket to watch the movie Legendary Entertainment eventually makes, this deep dive reveals something critical about our modern world.
It shows how the lens through which we view pop culture has fundamentally fractured.
A movie announcement is no longer just a movie announcement. It hasn't been for a while.
Right.
For a significant, vocal, and highly organized segment of the pop, casting script parts or an author's pronouns on a press release are viewed as hard, undeniable evidence of a grand economic and spiritual...
The stakes of entertainment have been raised to an existential level.
The entertainment we consume is no longer seen as a mere reflection of culture. It's seen as the primary weapon used.
Understanding that mindset, understanding the theories of wealth transfers and spiritual warfare that drive these communities is absolutely essential if you want to understand the modern cultural landscape.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own as you go about your day.
The cultural fan fiction idea?
Yeah. The author of Manacled took a world they loved, Harry Potter, and radically rewrote its rules to explore its darkest possibilities.
They looked at the established narrative of good triumphing over evil and changed how the universe functions.
In a way, aren't the commentators in our sources doing the exact same thing to Hollywood?
That is a fascinating parallel.
By radically rewriting the rules of how the entertainment industry supposedly works by entirely discarding the traditional accept of the pursuit of profit.
And replacing it with complex theories of intentional wealth transfers, intentional corporate failure, and coordinated spiritual humiliation.
Are they not crafting their own form of cultural fan fiction?
They are taking the real world, scrubbing out the accepted narrative of capitalism, and replacing it with a dark, alternate universe where executives are supervillains plotting the deliberate demise of society.
Which leads to the ultimate question you to ponder. Who actually holds the pen when it comes to shaping the narrative of our society? The people making the move or the people deciding?
That's the real question.
We will leave you with that. Thanks for joining.